Have you ever looked at a person and felt like they're completely normal, but deep down, something terrifying is hiding inside them? This happened several years ago. My girlfriend Stacy and I were completely drained from our everyday lives. Work, bills, and constant stress had slowly worn us down mentally. That's when Stacy suggested something. Why don't we go spend a few days in a quiet cabin in the woods? I immediately liked the idea. The only problem was money. Then Stacy suggested we bring my best friend Randy and his girlfriend along too. That way we could split the cost in half and make the trip more fun. I called Randy. He agreed without even thinking for a second. We had no idea that this decision was going to become the beginning of the most terrifying experience of our lives.
There were only 6 days left before the trip when suddenly Randy's girlfriend broke up with him. It ended really badly, and Randy was completely devastated. Stacy and I were confused. Should we return his money or just stay quiet? To be honest, we couldn't afford the trip on our own. I called Randy and offered to give his money back, but he refused outright. "Both of you should go and enjoy yourselves," he said. We finally breathed a sigh of relief. But the very next day, Randy called again. He told us he had already found a new girlfriend, and she would be joining us on the trip. Stacy and I just looked at each other. A girl we knew absolutely nothing about. And soon, we were going to realize that getting to know her might have been our biggest.
I tried hard to convince Randy. I told him it wasn't a good idea to spend several days with someone we didn't even know. But he wouldn't listen. In the end, he even offered to cover the entire cost of the trip himself, repeating the same thing over and over again. "Trust me, you guys will like her." Reluctantly, we agreed. The weekend arrived, and the 4 of us got into my truck and headed toward the woods. That's when we met her for the first time. Her name was Lucy. She was extremely quiet. So quiet, in fact, that during the entire drive, we barely heard her speak at all. Stacy and I kept trying to talk to her, but her responses were short and cold. At the time, we thought maybe she was just shy.
We had reached the cabin. The place was exactly what we had hoped for. Dense forest all around, cold air, and a warm fire burning inside. At first, everything felt normal. We were sitting near the fireplace, talking, when Stacy suddenly said, "Let's play Uno." We all agreed. Surprisingly, Lucy also seemed a little more open now. The game was going well and actually felt fun, until Stacy suddenly shouted, "Uno!" It meant she only had one card left. Out of nowhere, Lucy's expression completely changed. Her eyes filled with anger. "You're cheating!" she screamed. At first, we thought she was joking. But in the very next moment, she started screaming so loudly that the entire cabin echoed with her voice. And that's when we realized there was something seriously wrong with this girl. Lucy kept screaming nonstop. "Don't lie! You definitely cheated!" Stacy kept trying to explain that she hadn't done anything wrong, but Lucy refused to listen. Her voice no longer sounded like an angry adult. It sounded like an uncontrollable child. The strangest part was that we had only just met her. How could someone get this furious over a simple card game? Randy tried to calm her down. But then, suddenly, Lucy threw all her cards into the air and stormed out of the room in rage. For a few seconds, the entire cabin fell into silence. We just looked at each other, then laughed it off to lighten the mood. But deep down, all of us felt uneasy. And that was just the first red flag. A few hours after that strange incident, Stacy made dinner. We all gathered around the table, and surprisingly, Lucy seemed completely normal again, as if nothing had happened. There was no apology, no embarrassment, and no sign of the anger she had shown earlier. That sudden change in behavior felt even stranger to me. As we ate, Lucy started talking. At first, the conversation seemed harmless enough, but little by little, she began sharing deeply personal details, things most people would never tell complete strangers. She started talking about extremely private moments from her relationship with Randy. Randy's face turned bright red with embarrassment. I kept trying to change the subject with jokes and casual comments, but Lucy just wouldn't stop. And for the first time, a thought crossed my mind. Was Lucy simply a little strange? Or was there something much darker going on beneath the surface? That night, we went to bed early. It had been a long, exhausting day, and honestly, Lucy's behavior had already put a damper on the entire trip. I don't know what time it was when Stacy suddenly shook me awake. "Listen," she whispered. I stayed still and focused. A few seconds later, I heard it too. It was Randy and Lucy. The two of them were having a heated argument about something. The bedrooms were far apart, so we couldn't make out the exact words, but the anger in their voices made it clear that this was serious. Stacy and I exchanged a glance. We both knew something wasn't right, but we also knew that getting involved could make things even worse. So we decided not to bring it up in the morning. What we didn't know was that the real nightmare hadn't even begun yet. The next day passed in an unsettling silence. Randy seemed distant and distracted, while Lucy spent most of her time locked away in her room. Eventually, night fell, and we all went to bed. But sometime around midnight, I suddenly woke up. As my eyes adjusted to the darkness, I realized someone was standing beside my bed. My heart nearly stopped. A few seconds later, I recognized him. It was Randy. But the look on his face sent chills down my spine. He looked terrified. "Can I stay in your room tonight?" he asked in a trembling voice. I asked him what had happened. What Randy told me instantly wiped away any trace of sleep. He said he had woken up in the middle of the night and found Lucy standing at the foot of their bed, just staring at him. Stacy and I listened quietly as Randy continued his story. She simply shrugged and replied, "I was just watching you sleep, just to be safe." That answer alone was enough to make Randy feel uneasy. Then, without saying another word, Lucy walked out of the room. Several minutes passed, but she never came back. Worried, Randy got up to look for her, but the moment he glanced back at the bed, his blood ran cold. Hidden beneath Lucy's side of the blanket was a large knife, a knife that absolutely should not have been there. Terrified, Randy left the room immediately. But he had no idea that what was about to happen in the next few minutes would be even more frightening than the knife itself. After finding the knife, Randy was already terrified. He slowly made his way through the darkness toward our room, trying not to alert Lucy. But as he passed the living room, he saw something that sent a chill through his entire body. Lucy was wandering through the darkness alone. She moved slowly, almost as if she were performing some strange dance. And the most disturbing part, she was quietly humming a soft tune to herself. At first, Randy thought she might be sleepwalking. Then a floorboard creaked softly beneath his foot. The humming stopped instantly. The entire cabin fell silent. Then, without even turning to look at him, Lucy spoke in a slow, chilling voice. "I can see you." Randy didn't waste a single second. He turned around and ran straight to our room. The fear on Randy's face was unlike anything I had ever seen before. The three of us stood frozen in the room, while faint sounds from outside continued drifting through the cabin. Sometimes it was the sound of humming. Sometimes it was soft footsteps. And then, complete
Silence. Several tense minutes passed like that. Suddenly, the cabin's front door slammed shut. Bang! All three of us jumped. Randy rushed to the window, and what he saw left us completely shaken. Lucy was standing outside, and without the slightest hesitation, she was walking toward the woods in the freezing night air, wearing nothing but a t-shirt and shorts. It was as if she couldn't feel the cold at all. Randy panicked and suddenly shouted, "My knife! It's gone!" The moment he said those words, our stomachs dropped. This wasn't just strange behavior anymore. This had become a real threat.
The three of us stood frozen for several seconds. Randy kept blaming himself, nervously repeating that he had seen the knife there just a short while ago. Stacy immediately said we needed to go outside and find Lucy. No matter what was going on, she couldn't be left alone in the woods on a freezing night, whether she was sleepwalking or something else entirely. But Randy was completely shaken. "She's not normal. I can't go out there with her," he said, his voice trembling. I didn't know what to do. Then, from somewhere outside, we heard the faint sound of humming again. Soft, distant. Yet somehow, it felt incredibly close. Stacy put on her jacket and started walking toward the front door. But the moment she grabbed the handle, the door suddenly opened and slammed shut again. All three of us jumped backward. And then, a second later, that same humming echoed through the cabin. It wasn't coming from outside anymore. Lucy had returned, and she was somewhere inside the house. The three of us stood frozen in place, barely breathing. That same soft humming was echoing through the cabin now, the very sound we had heard outside only moments before. None of us could understand how Lucy had gotten back inside, or when she had even entered. Stacy slowly stepped backward and whispered, "We should hide." Randy looked like he was on the verge of breaking down. Pointing toward the door, he muttered, "She's back." The humming began to grow closer. Then we heard soft footsteps on the wooden floor. Tick, tick, tick. Each step sounded closer than the last, as if someone was slowly making their way directly toward her room. I grabbed Stacy's hand, and then suddenly, the sound stopped. The entire cabin fell silent. The silence was so heavy that even our own breathing sounded loud. The three of us stood in different corners of the room, but fear had us all trapped in the same place. Then we heard a faint creak from the wooden floor, as if someone was slowly moving around behind us. Stacy whispered softly, "Turn on the light." I had just reached toward the switch when Lucy's voice suddenly cut through the darkness from somewhere very close. "Why are you hiding from me?" We all froze. The voice didn't seem to come from any one direction. It was almost as if the entire room had spoken. Then, in the far
Randy
corner of the
swallowed hard
room,
and whispered,
something moved. A shadow.
"This isn't normal."
Slowly, it stepped forward from the darkness, and finally, we could see her clearly. Lucy was standing right there, but her face was completely calm, as if nothing had happened, as if the entire night had been perfectly normal. Then she tilted her head slightly and said, "I was only watching." The silence was so heavy that even our own breathing sounded loud. The three of us stood in different corners of the room, but fear had us all trapped in the same place. Then we heard a faint creak from the wooden floor, as if someone was slowly moving around behind us. Stacy whispered softly, "Turn on the light." I had just reached toward the switch when Lucy's voice suddenly cut through the darkness from somewhere very close. "Why are you hiding from me?" froze. The voice didn't seem to come from any one direction. It was almost as if the entire room had spoken. Randy swallowed hard and whispered, This isn't normal.
Then, in the far corner of the room, something moved. A shadow. Slowly, it stepped forward from the darkness, and finally, we could see her clearly. Lucy was standing right there, but her face was completely calm, as if nothing had happened, as if the entire night had been perfectly normal. Then she tilted her head slightly and said, I was only watching.